Hello, my name is Barbara Field. My channel is The Journey of Grief, Becoming Us Without Them, and welcome today. I started this channel so that people who are grieving all kinds of losses could just find people who are like them and maybe some resources. And so today I've invited my friend Steve to talk to us about the grief of having your life blow up. And so Steve, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and whatever you want us to know.
Oh, thank you first and foremost for having me. It's an honor. I've admired your work for years, that's for sure. So just being welcomed on this platform is amazing. I am currently working as an emergency response therapist for the Sacramento Children's Home, and a therapist for a non-public school, um, and also back working again as a pastor at my church. I am the worship pastor there, which is huge. That's huge for me. And just backstory, a little bit about myself. I started out in everything I wanted to do was ministry. My life was, um, for me, it was a like, what can I do? What can I give, on every level? And so ministry was the biggest thing for me. Got married right out of high school, um, and I mean, was was with was with my wife, for 19 years of marriage. Just like 21 or 22 years total, I think. And it's so crazy that we're on this week because this Friday would have marked the 21st year of marriage. Yeah,
Well, those
so
are days.
yeah, yeah. um, but we divorced, separated, back in 2022. And in the process of that separation, I got involved with another individual, and it ended up sparking a whole bunch of loss that I wasn't prepared for. So with my ex-wife, there was affairs in the marriage, and I tried to maintain and remain, Pastor Steve, smiles on my face, and encourage people on a regular basis. But you can only fake healing for so long. Didn't do the proper um, work. It was more so, I was putting band-aids on stuff for years, putting band-aids on our marriage. And then finally I had enough. I found myself having a drink every chance I could. I was drunk as often as possible, in my house, feeling like a stranger. We were in separate rooms for the last maybe 2 years of our marriage. It was like, I'm in the garage, she's in her room type of thing. And then finally got to the place where it's like, you know what, this is my mental health, or it's I started thinking about, taking my own life, and so I had to make that move. But I think the biggest shock came when I got involved with someone else, and then, um, instead of what I expected to be from the church, was that I had served for many years. Um, I expected, I guess, people to walk with me, people to, um, like we kind of talked about, like some say, "Hey, Steve, this is not the route you're supposed to take," and walk with me and coach me and lead me down this path, of walking, I guess, above reproach, going through a divorce. And I didn't have that. In fact, I had the opposite. I had, um, the church leaders and people at the church kind of like, "Ooh, no, don't touch Steve right now. He's a sinner." um,
Let's
and
just stop and talk for just a minute. So
Yeah.
having your marriage had been dying with the affairs and her kind of saying you're not in, or you hearing her say you're not enough,
Hmm.
and trying to put band-aids on that. So you had probably begun grieving that relationship a little bit already, and nonetheless, moving out of there, walking away from your childhood sweetheart, that's the same as a death. And so a version of you, the married guy, the guy with the perfect life, died on that day and began a deep, painful grieving process. And it's not unusual at all for those of us who are trying to manage deep grief to come up with some less than helpful ideas. As a therapist, I have a lot of clients who are working through having quickly married someone else after their partner died, and then finally beginning to do their grief work and drop back down in their body and looking at their new partner thinking, oh no, who are you and how did you get in my house? And they,
Yeah.
sold their houses and moved in together and trying to build this life. And they realize now that they've gone through their grief process, this isn't someone that they would have chosen if they had been awake. So that you sprung off into an affair is not a surprise at all. Like we talked about, those are some good neurochemicals. And it's that part
Yeah.
of you that felt like not chosen, not good enough, that she wasn't glad to be with you, and to have a new relationship and those awesome dating hormones and have someone look at you with amazement and joy and be glad to be with you. That's a powerful lure. And yet, like you said, if someone from the church had been able to say, Steve, what are you doing? This looks like a reactive behavior here, buddy. How can we help you with this? You might have been able to say, oh, what am I doing? How did I get here? And instead,
Yeah.
it just got worse instead of better.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it felt like. I mean, just taking in the just taking the weight of saying, hey, a 20 plus year relationship is over. And as a kid, I was a kid right out of high school. I learned an adult life with my ex-wife. We raised each other, and in a sense it was leaving your parents' house all over again and trying to figure out the world and like um how do I do this the right way? Just today I was at Guitar Center because I needed to buy something, and I see a beautiful guitar and I walk in, I'm like, walk away. And then I said to myself, I need someone to tell me no. And it's little things like that. Like you get used to that. And it's not a bad thing in my opinion, like someone to ground me and talk with me. And that's who my ex-wife was. It was someone that I would bounce ideas off of. It was a life that I was able to live because of her. And then that's done. Yeah, I over time, as I want to say it was a 7 year period or 8 year period from her last affair to the end where I was like, I can't do this anymore. So I did have time to little by little lose the respect, lose the love, lose the glimmer in the eye, lose the butterflies, lose all the things. And then when all that was left was who we really are, and I was not me. I found that I wasn't me. I was living for the next high. I wanted either the next drink, I wanted the next guitar, I wanted the next car, and I was so excited, and what kept me going was waiting for something in the mail, waiting for something to drop in price so that I can get it. And when I realized that, oh my goodness, this is me crying out, saying, I lost me and I'm trying to find me again. That's when the beginning of the end of the marriage started. When I realized that I was a shell of myself, and on top of that, I didn't even recognize myself. And then the grieving started. And when the grieving started, I was grasping for straws. I was grasping for everything and anyone. And then found that connection in someone that who, by the way, was also going through a divorce. And so it just seemed perfect. We just talked about how much divorce sucked. And before you know it, it's like, hey, well, maybe it's me and you know? And in the process, understanding now, we didn't allow each other to grieve properly or at all. You know, anytime she was feeling something, I was like, let me help her not feel that. And anytime I was feeling something, she would run in to help me not feel that. And what was really happening was we were just prolonging our healing. And we ended up now, I mean, now it's been like 2 years. And so I haven't seen her in about that long. And I'm doing great. You know, I've had time to heal, I've had time to process. Um, and I pray she has to. Uh, don't really know. But at the same time, it's like I couldn't help her do that. And I didn't realize it. I was still in a very strange way trying to be Pastor Steve, you know, because I was holding on to some little bit of who I was. I was trying my best to still help someone, all the while still ignoring me. And it wasn't until I realized that I was just masking the healing and the grief. I was trying not to grieve because grieving hurts. And in the process of grieving, I think there's a death. There was a death of Steve. I died when that marriage died. So did I, because I was that marriage. The only difference is nobody shows up to mourn it. You know, nobody shows up to say, okay, this is the mourning process. In fact, oftentimes the opposite happens, and I found that people would rather walk away from a friend that's grieving because they don't know what to say or they don't want to say the wrong things.
Yeah, we're
But
pretty overwhelming.
yeah, yeah, and I don't have any hard feelings now. Looking back, I don't. Now I get it. I get it. And I remember when I had when I was married, I witnessed a few friends that walked through divorce in the church. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't know what to say to them. And so I would try my best and send a text here and there, and then they would get a little deeper in conversation, and then I would resort to the old pastor talk, like, oh, God knows, and God, yeah. But sometimes we need more than that.
And it's really only so many people have the capacity for that. I was really lucky. My siblings and I, we had very difficult parents, and so we were a little bit more like litter mates than closely bonded human beings. So we haven't really done a good job of being in relationship with each other since
Yeah,
we all
yeah.
left home. But my sister and I try. And right after my husband died, she's super busy. I was super busy, but every single time I called, she answered the phone. And it never dawned on me until, I don't know, 2 years in. Like I said, do you realize that every single time I call you answer the phone? She said, absolutely, I'm doing that on purpose. In the past, if I was in the middle of something, I'd just text you, I'll call you later. But I knew that if you, Miss Stoic, I can take care of this myself, actually picked up the phone and called, I better answer it.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like I had in my head, like everybody's gone, everybody left, and it's just one of the masks that we kind of put on. Like I'm gonna do this by myself. But when it all boiled down to it, like just that one person, as I had that person too, that told me anytime you call me, anytime of night, anytime of day, I'm here. And that one person was oftentimes just what I needed to get past, to get through. And so it's like it was a true blessing to realize that I had that. And then when the dust settled, I realized a lot more people there that still were on my side and still rooting for me and still wanting the best for me. And I also found that nobody wished harm on me, you know. It's just
No,
kind of one of the things, and it's one of the things that I wrote about in my book is social media is not your friend, especially when you're grieving,
Right.
because you see everybody's highlights, while you're living the lowest parts of your life. And for me, it wasn't just the divorce. Like I said, the divorce was a huge one. It was big. Then it was the separation from the church, and I was also a full-time employee of the church. So there goes my finances. And then I lost my grandma that year. And then I went from, I think the biggest ones were probably what most people would see as some of the smallest things, like my dogs. Like this guy, he's back with me now. But there was a whole almost 2 years of my life in which I didn't get to come home and see this guy. And when I would see him periodically, when I would pick up my daughter, he almost didn't recognize me. And he would look at me like, I don't want to talk to you. And then the other dog passed away. And it's like I wasn't there for the last part of his life. And I think the hardest one was realizing that I also had to grieve coming home every day to my daughter. Like knowing that when I lock my door at night, she's not in the house. That was a whole other level of grief. That the silence of walking into your house at night or at the end of your workday is so loud.
It is terrible.
Yeah, and I think that in the beginning it was woe is me type of thing because I didn't, and I don't even want to call it woe is me. It was just my body was doing whatever it can do. My brain was doing whatever it can do to survive, and oftentimes it was the smallest thing. It was the smallest thing that set me off. And I got to the point where I would walk through the door and I would say, "Hey, Dad," to myself, just because I was so used to hearing it.
Yeah.
And at first I didn't have a place for my daughter to go. I didn't have. I was sleeping in my truck for a little bit. And then I had a really good friend that offered a room for me because I didn't have finances. And so I was sleeping in a room, a family's house. Fortunately, it was a two-story house and it was a really big house. So um, forever thankful for that. But by the time I did get my own house, my daughter had walked through the grief with my ex-wife and they bonded. And so it was complete opposite because like I mentioned, my ex-wife had affairs. And the very last one that she had, she was gone. She left the house for almost a year. I don't know. And so my daughter and I bonded through that period. And I remember a specific time where my ex-wife came to visit my daughter, and my daughter said, "No, I don't want to see you." She said, her exact words were, "You're not my friend, Mom. Dad's my best friend." And I remember correcting my daughter, like, "No, you don't talk to your mom like that. Like, I don't care what happens. That's your mom." And I remember seeing the look of pain on my ex-wife's face. And I didn't like that feeling for her. But then it flipped. And then I had that. And my daughter never expressed that to me because she was older, but I felt it. Little things like I would say, "Hey, babe, this movie's coming out. You want to go to the movie?" I'd rather go with Mom." And I'm like, "Okay." And then I'd turn around and I'd be crying like a little baby, but she wouldn't know. She doesn't know. She still don't know. I think those were the hardest parts of grief because I didn't even know that was going to be a thing. Like in my head, I calculated, I thought I counted the cost. Okay, I get a divorce. This, I'm going to be single now. This, I'm going to have to do this by myself. I'm going to have to do this by myself. Um, but I didn't calculate. I never once thought that my daughter's relationship would change, you know? And then add to it that she'll be 19 in a few weeks. Um, just that relationship alone changes from 19-year-old girl to a father changes. But for the last 3 years, not being the person that comes home to her every day, it added more change to it. And so I had to do little things to get myself up and running. Um, because there is a, I mean, there's what I believe to be linear stages of grief, and we walk through them. And I didn't know how to process a lot of stuff. My therapist is amazing. She helped me through a lot of it. Um, and then I found a church with pastors that are amazing, and they were they cared about me. And it was rare because I've done ministry for so long, and every church I would show up at, people recognized me, and there was always at least one person, "Are you going to be here now? Are you going to take over the music?" And I'm like, "I just need God, and this is where I can find him." Because when I'm alone, me and him don't talk because I'm mad, because I didn't expect this to happen. I expected one thing and I got a completely different case and scenario.
Now let's talk about that for a bit. So
Absolutely.
God is a really terrible slot machine. Sometimes we have the idea that if we're doing what we're supposed to do, then we can reach up and pull that handle and God's going to do what he's supposed to do. Well, that isn't how God functions in our lives. And so, the handle's not actually attached to anything. And he doesn't respond like that. And
No.
but I remember when my husband died, how angry I was. And those thoughts would go through my head, and I think, can you stop that? But like, how
Hmm.
could you let this happen to me? I mean, it took me years. We had to do marriage counseling 3 times for me to get uncrazy enough to actually attach to this guy. And then we finally, like the last 15 or 44 years, we had a really great marriage. But it was like, why did you talk me into attaching to him if you knew he was just going to leave like this? And, you know, God didn't take him. There's, someone who's already had 3 heart attacks and is back to drinking double shot mochas and Burger King is, it's really hard to blame that on God.
Yeah.
So, but nonetheless, I was just furious in general, and then really mad at God for like, oh, you've been a perfect little perky church lady. I'm a Christian counselor. You owe me, buddy.
Yeah.
And that isn't how God works. And then to discover that a lot of my church friends lacked the capacity to walk through this with me. So you have this idea of your church as a family. So we first joined the church in Louisiana. There were 75 members and I was related to all of them. So it did function like a family. And then to come out here where it's more like a bunch of strangers who show up on Sunday and hang out, and then just watch it not function like a family, not have the capacity for someone who's losing their mind. And then when you not only were in so much pain because of the divorce and them not, oh no, what are we going to do with this divorced guy? And pastors are supposed to be perfect. They're not supposed to be divorced. You're walking on the edge here, buddy. And then to lack the capacity to sidle up next to you when you cleared to be completely insane. That's
Yeah.
it's not a surprise. Non-Christians will bitch at us about that all the time. You guys really aren't what you say you are, but we don't seem to realize that we're not what we say we are.
No, and what's crazy is that we preach about it on a Sunday morning all the time. We talk about these heroes of the faith and King David and none. If you look through all these people that we preach about, not a single one with passive background check nowadays to be a pastor. They wouldn't. They wouldn't. And it's crazy that we expect that from our pastors nowadays. And I did. I got to the place where I I I felt like, okay, my sin and my grief, it disqualified me from grace. Like I don't have it anymore. It's not here. And so when I did find a church that was like, listen to my story, I sat down with a pastor and listened to my story and was like, what can we do for you? I was like, huh? because it just sounded foreign to me, which is so weird because it's almost like we're a church, but we want to walk with you through your high points. But if you're in the middle of sin or in the low point of grieving or these places where we're not qualified to help you, we'll pray for you. We're praying that. But when you come back, oh my goodness, we're gonna celebrate with you. And it's like, I don't need you to celebrate with me. I need you to walk with me in the low points of
Right.
life.
I don't need you in the light at the end of the tunnel. I need
No.
you in the tunnel.
Yeah. Which is again, and I have, and I don't even know that I want to go in this direction, but I have so many now, having gone through, seminary and gotten to the ordination level, which is essentially, bachelor's level, with non-accredited colleges to become a pastor, and then right after that going into the other side of it and going all the way to the master's in the clinical mental health and APCC, all that fun stuff that you get to put before your name. Looking at it, I'm like, I need someone that's super qualified to be my pastor. Not just someone that I went through this school and we paid $95 for the class and I have a whole year to take it, or I can test out of it in one day and I'm your pastor now. And it's like, and that's that. Maybe that's just a me thing, but everyone else I know for a fact, and I'm sure you do, just the process of being licensed as a therapist, it's a hoop after hoop, and it's DOJ and FBI, they want to know everything about you type of stuff. And I'm like thinking to myself, do I really want to do this? And then I stop and think, and I'm like, well, these are the people that are in charge of my mental health. So if they're in charge of helping me when I need the most help mentally, then yeah, I want to be sure that they've been vetted and that they've walked through this process that says I am qualified. But for some reason, when it's our spiritual health, it's like, yeah, sure, you grew up in church, you could be a pastor. And so I don't know, maybe that's a chip on my shoulder type thing, but it's
Well,
just,
it is, but it's a disappointment that the Bible is not all full of happy, happy, joy, joy. The Bible is full of words that say, like, count it all joy when you experience hard times.
yeah,
And people want to quote Romans 8:28, all things work together, but they don't start at 18 where it says, and so this present suffering, and when we are in so much pain that we can't even talk
yeah,
to God. They don't
yeah,
want to talk about the parts where it says the pain is the point. I've come to take away your pain. I've come to be with you in your pain. Not,
yeah,
I've come to make your life perfect. And somehow we just keep selling ourselves and everybody else this idea that being a Christian means you have it all together and you don't have any problems and everything always
no,
works for you. And we just
no,
work our buns off trying to sell that to people. And when you're someone like me who all her life has said, but can't we talk about the real stuff? Can't we talk about the real stuff? Like, nope, you stand over there with the weirdos.
yeah, yeah. And I feel like that's kind of always been me anyway, just stand over there with the weirdos, but we have to give you a position because you've done all the work and we can't deny it to you type of thing. It's always felt like that for me. So, I mean, it just goes to show, like, like you said, we talk about the high points. So if we preach that all the time, when the low points come around, we don't know what to do. And it's not like we don't read them or whatever. It's just like you use them, and I don't blame anybody for it. It's just you almost take the role of a pastor, and it's the mindset of like, I have to encourage people. I have to encourage people, but that's not it. Like you walk with people in the good and the bad. And I know that there's people that can say, and then I'm not saying, there's some amazing pastors. And I don't know that, you know, there's anything specific that makes them amazing pastor versus not amazing pastor to me specifically. For all I know, they're amazing pastors to a small group of people,
Right.
which is probably the only thing they're capable of, and that's totally fine. Like even Jesus did that, you know, the 5,000, 10,000, and then the 72, and then the 12, but then only two of them or one of them was his
Right.
best friend. Like that model makes sense. So I get that, but to get to a point where it's like almost the consensus of church people is like, well, I'm doing my best to stay away from sin, and if you're in sin, I'm going to stay away from you. It's like, what?
Well,
Like,
and pain, it's the because we don't know how. There's cultures that are so good at this stuff with
mm-hmm,
life and pain and death and grieving and it's all good. Everything is good.
yeah,
So all of the parts of you, the broken parts, the wounded parts, the painful parts, they're all welcome and people don't have to flee from you. But we're not so good at that in this country, and so we don't really have it in us to be with people that are in pain. And the crazy thing is, it's actually the easiest thing in the world. You don't have to do anything. What people need is for you just to be willing to be with them, to just sit with you in it. And a friend showed up right after my husband died, and she had been a widow, maybe 6+ years. And she said, it's kind of like she came to give me the widow primer. Here's what you can expect. Like, let me make it okay for you that you're going to enter this grief process and it's going to be terrible. Don't try to make it stop. Don't try to make it better. Don't
mm-hmm,
let anyone convince you. Just
mm-hmm,
here's the deal. But one of the things she told me was, I'm 73, so I was 64 when my husband died, and she's about the same age as me. And she said, don't be too surprised when all your couples friends go away. And I'm like, well, that's silly. Why would that happen? And I said, are you saying they liked him, but they don't like me? She said, no, it's just, it's too hard. They've in, a lot of them only have couple lives. They don't have any single people in their life. So they don't even know what to do with you. Like my table has an even number of chairs. Where are you going to sit? But
yeah,
you're also, you and he were a thing, and they were used to hanging out with the thing that was you and him, and they don't know how to make space for you. But she said a lot of it is that by the time we are like 55, 60 years old, men die earlier. And so there's like one guy for every 10 women, and women are afraid that you're going to steal their husband away. And I'm like, I don't even know why you want your husband. Why would I want him for myself? But and then it just what you're doing, you're like a crystal ball that shows them in not very long, one of us is going to be in this much pain, and I just don't want to see it coming. And
yeah,
it turns out to be true. It isn't like if you
yeah,
call them and say, hey, let's get together, they don't say no, but they don't include you in stuff anymore. It's really funky. So like you, that's another part of myself that I lost, was a part of that group of
yeah,
people. And so you, like, if you look at all your parts, you lost your husband part, your dad part, your neighbor part, your homeowner part, your job part, your pastor part. I mean, you lost a lot of stuff. So what
yeah.
was most helpful for you in reclaiming yourself?
Oh, I think, I don't want to, play like the perfect role and be like, immediately I stepped back into this and everything was fine. No, it was reclaiming the parts of myself that I knew was me, that didn't have to do with anybody else. So, for instance, um, I am my daughter's dad. Nobody else. Nobody else is her dad. You know, there can be father figures in her life and so on. So I said, that is who I am. I'm her dad. And so because she's older, because she's got her own life, I had to step away from this idea, oh, I'm your dad, so you have to respect me as if I'm your dad. I'm your dad, you have to love me as if I'm your dad. I stopped this almost entitled mindset of like, no, you're my daughter, you have to. And I shifted it to, okay, now I have to earn being her dad. I don't get the, hey, dad, or hey, dad, look at this anymore when I walk in the door. Now I have to make the effort to say, hey, babe, good morning. And so every morning, still to this day, and it won't stop if you ask me, if I have anything to do with, if I have fingers, I'm going to text my daughter or call her every morning. And I just say, hey, babe, I hope you had a great night. You have anything planned today? And then she opens up. Sometimes she doesn't respond, and that's okay. I still do it. Um, and we started rebuilding there. I found stuff that interested her, and I got interested. I forced myself to get involved in it. And so that way, when I did see her, when I did meet with her, it was like, babe, I saw this, and she's like, oh, and she would light up. And so we started connecting. She likes wrestling. I love wrestling, WWE. And so it was like, okay, every weekend that they have a pay-per-view, we're getting together and we're watching this. And I bought the little belts and I bought the action figures, and we would sit and we would watch it. And it was like we were having fun, and it sparked inside of me like, okay, I'm still a dad. I'm still her dad. She's still excited to be with her dad. And that is Steve. Steve is her dad. Steve is Genesis' dad. And so that was the first aspect of me saying, okay, I'm reclaiming this part of me. The second was music. I'm a music man. I've been a music man my whole life. I started singing. Gosh, my mom would tell me, and it's funny because it was almost like a party trick. I was like, I don't know, 5, 6 years old, maybe even younger. And we had a record player, and my mom would put on a worship record, and I would be standing next to the worship record, and it would never fail. A specific song would come on. Actually, my mom just sent it to me in a text not too long ago, saying this was the song. But the song would come on, and I would be crying, bawling my eyes out in front of this record player, and they would almost like, it was like a party trick, and like, look, he's gonna cry, and I'm there crying. My soul just connected with music. And so from a young age, that's who I was, but I had neglected it because that was also part of what I did. I was a worship pastor, but no longer. I was taken away from that role. So I guess if people didn't say that I was worthy of it, then I must not be. And I believe that. And so I reconnected with my guitar. I started writing. I started writing my own music. I started doing country music. I started doing worship music. I started making these songs. And and my therapist told me, you should probably go to a church. You should probably audition for a team and just play guitar. Just sing backup vocals. Don't go in as a leader. Don't go in as this man that has 20 plus years of experience of leading worship. Go in as just someone auditioning for a team. And at first I was like, nah, I can't. I've been a boss for too long, if you will. And then I realized, but that's not the right attitude. It was a part of me that I was missing. And so I did. I got reconnected. I got back on a worship team, and before I knew it, it's like, okay, this is also another part of Steve that is really me. And so it was a puzzle piece. It was piece by piece that I started reconnecting with parts of me. And then it was, hey, this friend and that friend, and um, cars, working on cars. I love working on classic cars, and I have a 1966 Chevy Impala, and that became my best friend for a little bit. I'd get in there and I'd start it up, just the roar of the engine, the smell of the gasoline, and I'd go for a drive. And that's stuff that I did before I was with my ex-wife. And I connected to who I was before I was married. And then it sounds crazy because I was a kid before I was married. I got married at 19 years old. So prior
Me
to,
too.
yeah, it sounds crazy because if I think about people that I know that were in my youth group that were 19 years old, and I'm like, yeah, no, don't even think about getting married. You're too young. But I was ready for it, you know? And so I started connecting with who I was back then. I'd stop and I'd think about like, what did I do when I was single? It was so long ago. Like, I don't even remember who that Steve was, but that was probably the most genuine Steve because I did what I wanted to do. I did what genuinely made me happy. If someone's like, hey, let's do this, nah. But when you get married, things change and there's compromise and there's shift and change. And then I later found out that there was more bending and breaking, if you will, on my end than my ex-wife's end. And before I knew it, I gave up my entire self just to be her husband. And so I reconnected with who I was just little by little. And before I knew it, I'm like, hey, not only was I no longer depressed, not only was I doing little things that were helping me find myself again, but I was living. And it reminded me of like that Forrest Gump scene where he's little by little with the his legs are in the stilts or the crutches or whatever they're called, and
The
he's little by
braces.
little, yeah, the braces, yeah, and he's going little by little, and before he knows it, he's like, and I was running, and I'm like, that was me, and that now here I am, finished my master's program, and flew to where my school is in Washington, past Seattle and Kirkland, and I walked the stage, and it was a moment where I'm like, I'm proud of me because this is something that I was able to accomplish despite everything that had come against me, if you will, and a lot of it I'm responsible for. I get that. I understand that. No, no, not trying to absolve myself of blame or say that this happened to me. No, I'm responsible for a lot of it. But all that happened in such a short span of time, and then I was able to complete a very rigorous master's program that lasted 3 years for a reason. Um, it was the first time I stopped and looked and was like, Steve, you're living. You're alive. And not only that, I was looking forward to tomorrow. And so it was little things like I said, it was just reconnecting with me. And even the smallest things, like I went and found like old action figures that I used to have, and I repurchased them and I display them in my house. Um, and it's stuff like that. Like, no, this is me. This is me. I I I I remembered things like, my dad telling me like, don't grow up too fast. And I'm like, yeah, but I had to because I chose marriage at a young age, and I chose to leave my parents' house at a young age. And I know most people are like, dude, you were 19. But in a Hispanic household, sometimes you stay till 45. So I did. I left early. Um, and I wasn't a full-grown man at all. I was still a boy. And so I reconnected with the little boy. I did. I talked to him. I found myself through the little boy. Yeah.
That's great. So we're out of time, but at the end of all of my podcasts, first I want to thank you so much for honoring us with your authentic rendition of all of this journey of yours. And then, like, if you could just leave us with one thing, I call it your 1 minute wisdom. If nobody listened to anything we did the whole rest of this video, what's the one thing you hope people take away from this journey
Oh,
of divorce and crashing and burning and rebuilding from scratch?
I would say that, and I didn't even mention it. I wrote a book as well. So that's a fun part.
I
And it's
like your book.
available September 1st. I actually have the pre-copies or
Oh,
whatever. So
cool.
that's pretty
I
cool.
will have that in the show notes so people can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. I wrote it in there, but I think the biggest thing would be is regardless of where you're at, where life has brought you or you find yourself, there's still a you worth fighting for. There's always a you worth fighting, a version of you worth fighting for. And that's what I'm saying. Like me connecting with my younger self taught me that there's still a me worth fighting for. Yeah.
It sounds like you're loving the you that you've discovered at the
I
bottom of your
am.
pile of poop.
Yeah. Yep. He's here. He's alive. He's thriving.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay.